This video will show you how to attack back your opponent if opponent is playing with the white pieces and try to attack you with the fried liver attack. We also surprise the opponent with a new variation for a black, that is pawn to b5. Let's deep dive into this video and how use this variation against your opponent. As in this video we are defending the fried liver attack done by the white, so we were playing as black pieces. White started with pawn to e4, black respond with pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, very common opening, bishop to c4, and then respond knight to f6. This is a setup that allows opponent to move its knight to g5. This will allow your opponent to attack on the f7 square. So now both white's knight and bishop is attacking on the f7 square. So now the most common move after knight to g5 is pawn to d5. A very common response by the white is pawn captures on the d5. In this case, one of the most popular variation is knight to a5. This will attacking on the bishop and try to remove the bishop from the diagonal, which is targeting on the f7 square. But instead of going knight to the a5, we will explore the pawn to b5 variation. This is slightly interesting variation. Let's dive deep into this and how it will be good for the. Before moving ahead into this video, let's also note down some important moves that black should keep in mind so that plan works in the favor of black. Here white have a two option. White bishop can capture the pawn or pawn can capture the knight. Maybe white is thinking about capturing the pawn with the bishop so that he can put double attack on the knight, and knight is also pinned to the king. So if white bishop capture the pawn, the first step is achieved. Now we surprise the white with the queen capture the pawn on d5. Now queen is attacking on bishop and pawn on g2. So white captures the knight on c6 with the bishop. So queen have to capture the bishop first, but still the queen is aiming at the pawn on g2. Now to save its pawn on g2 and to put its rook into the center, if white decided to castle, and if he castled, then it's a blunder, and also our step 2 is achieved. Black simply put its bishop on the b7 and creating the battery with the queen and bishop. And if white didn't notice that, and if he simply move its rook to e1, then queen to g2 is checkmate. Or if he decided to move its pawn to the d3, even then queen to g2 is checkmate. So white have a three option now. Either white can put its pawn to the f3, knight to the f3, or queen to the f3. Let's see pawn to the f3 first. Let's assume white started with the pawn to f3. Here black simply pushes pawn to the h6 and now attacking on the white's knight. So white knight has to go back. So move its knight to the h3. Now here comes the very interesting move. Now black will start pushing his g pawn and black will move its pawn to the g5. After this move, let's assume white go with the pawn to d3. Then we still push our pawn to the g4. And if white try to capture the pawn on g4, then queen to g2 is clear checkmate. So threat is still there. So instead of doing that, if white pushes knight to the f2 before the pawn comes to the g4, still we push for the g4. And now if he ignore the pawn capture on the f3 and start pushing the pawn on d3, we still capture the pawn on f3 and queen captures the pawn on f3. Maybe white is thinking about that black will accept the exchange. Yes, we do accept the exchange, because after the exchange pawn has to capture our queen on the f3. So we can simply put our rook on the g8. It's a check. King has to go to the h1 and bishop to f3 is a clear checkmate. Remember this position. From this position we already discussed what if white moves its pawn to the f3. So now let's start what if white moves its knight to the f3. We can push that e5 pawn to the e4, but we want to keep the line open for the queen and bishop battery. So we do castling first, and now rook is enjoying the open file. Let's suppose white move its pawn to the d3 to open up its bishop. Black go with the crazy looking move pawn to g5. Bishop may capture pawn on g5. Now we simply move our rook to the g8. Now in addition to queen and bishop battery, we have a black rook attacking on the g2 pawn. If white thinks that knight is guarding the bishop on g5 and move its pawn to the d5, then it's wrong. If rook capture the bishop, knight cannot capture the rook because queen to g2 is checkmate. So instead of doing anything else, bishop take the knights on f3, and now queen take the bishop, and now it's still attacking on the knight f3 and pawn is pinned. So if white try to defend the knight by moving its knight to the d2, we can attack on the defender by moving our bishop to h6. After bishop to h6, a knight on d2 is under attack. So maybe white move its knight to the e4, trying to attack on our queen. But again, it's inaccurate move because bishop from b7 can capture the knight on the e4. Pawn cannot capture the bishop back because pawn is already pinned to the queen. To move its king from the pin, white move its king to the h1. We will not capture the knight, so we take back the bishop to the b7 and keep pressure on the knight to f3. Now white move its queen to the e2. Again, black will going for one more crazy looking move, that rook captures the g2 pawn. If king captures the rook on the g2, then white is gone. Pause the video, and can you tell what is the best move for black to do checkmate from here? If you know the answer, please tell your answer in the comment box. After pawn to f3 and knight to f3, let's see the variation queen to f3. Usually you don't want to push the pawn from e5 to e4, but when white moves its queen to the f3, we will go for that and pushes a pawn to e4. Let's say queen go to the e3. Now we push the h pawn h6 and attack on the knight. So knight will go to the h3. Black should castle first without worrying about the a7 pawn safety, because if queen capture on a7, bishop to c5 attacking on queen and the pawn on f7. Queen will go to the a5 as it's the only safe option. Black will move its pawn to the e3. Again, g2 checkmate is open. So instead of capturing the pawn on e3, white move its pawn to the f3 and stop the g2 checkmate. Black can capture on d2 and give a discover check by bishop. Knight to f2 and king is safe. That will not work long as knight is pinned and pawn will not capture the bishop, but instead of that he will promote to queen. Now if rook capture the d1 queen, then black rook capture the rook on d1 and king is in check. White queen try to defend, but rook to e1 is a beautiful checkmate. So we have discussed the three variations, that is pawn to f3, knight to f3 and queen to f3 in this video. You should do practice this 4-5 times before playing against your opponent, and also explore the other variation that white can come up with. We will also make part 2 of this video in which we will cover the other variation that white can do and how you can defend against them. Please do subscribe to our channel for the more information video related to chess.